let me ask a stupid question. And I say it's stupid, not because the three of us think it's stupid, but because we get asked this all the time, which is, all right, I'm forming a blockchain company. I am planning at some point in the near distant future to issue a token. Like, what's a valuation? Why is that relevant to me? And and I guess my part two to that question is, does your is it relevant, or more or less relevant to me if I'm forming this company somewhere offshore versus I'm energized and excited and want to form my company and issue my token in the United States.
Yeah. Um, God, so much to go with there.
Yeah,
And so many
start
directions.
wherever you want, and
A
it's just
multi-pronged
like it's just
question.
a
Yeah.
stupid question. People ask you this
No,
thing, so
It's like the scene in Back to School. I have one question in 27 parts. That's what Moish just did to you. So.
I have only one question for Mr. Mellon. In 27 parts.
no, look, it is, and look, questions that we get constantly, right? So I guess on the token side of things, if I'm issuing a token, yeah, there's obviously a lot of use cases to it. I think one of the biggest things to think about just broadly is, people say this all the time, don't make the token the product. The token should be kind of complementary to things that you are already doing. That said, there's plenty of meme coins.
one would hope that it's not
Yeah, you would think
token
so,
issued
right?
but there's some utility or
Yeah,
function
right.
within an ecosystem, right? It's
Yeah,
accomplishing something that some other token doesn't already accomplish, right?
right, and that would be the idea, right? And so you've got this token that is complementary to this concept, right? Whether it's in DeFi gaming or other types of kind of industries. And so, if that's the case, and then you have a company that's gone out and raised money, and either probably from the venture world, and a lot of times it has this massive like safe valuation cap, and there's this implied value towards it, and then you're going to issue a token. So in the early days, the idea is that the token, just because it's speculative, may not have a lot of value at early. And there's different methodologies to get there to kind of justify that concept. There's a lot of things, especially in the IP world, we talk about kind of cost-based methodologies. There's market implications as well. And through a marrying of those, you can still at very early stages justify why that value is low. And the reason why that makes sense, and then some of the use cases around that of distributing the tokens to founders and early players in the market to understand and take full value of that, like what we do in equity, right? Like if someone's issuing shares of a company that's just founded, it's very similar, right? This is just for the token part of it. That's why the value of that token may be on the lower side, and why it makes sense to issue those tokens to entities and individuals at early stages. Once that grows and the token launches and the product actually, separate from that, starts to take shape, then you start seeing more value. And then, do you do this here in the US? Do you do this, offshore into the Cayman, Switzerland, Singapore? That is, and I will probably push that question to you, but I will just say this.
Fair enough.
On our travels, just being in Switzerland and Singapore and other jurisdictions that we know a lot of folks in the Cayman. It's interesting just to see that concept. I can say that just through conversations I've had, here in the States with certain either regulatory bodies or other people close to the industry, there is an emphasis to have things here, right? And you've seen like the DUNA structure, right? All of that, and with the regulatory kind of winds pushing back to the States and making it safe for us to operate out of here, the concept of offshoring things may not be necessary. But I think what's interesting is that now that has become, because of the way that the U.S. has changed kind of back and forth a few different times. It's almost like, like the Cayman or offshoring is the conservative way to go, right?
Right.
So, it's just really weird to see that. And so I would say like a vast majority of folks that we talk to are starting a project still, prefer just, hey, look, we know this is tried and true. We know where the issues are, right? In terms of, separating 482 and all of that, like, that concept of, a disaffiliated entity and all of that, right? We know that, hey, yeah, it hangs by a certain type of concept of justification, if you will, right, in terms of the relationship between the two. What's the value if I'm licensing things, or they're if I'm transferring the property, etc. I know what I'm dealing with there, right? I know how to justify that to a certain degree, and the Cayman guys or the guys in Switzerland or whatever other jurisdiction you want to do this in, we know how to operate on that. And so it's interesting, like, while I feel like there is an emphasis to bring stuff back, and I think we will have more things start and structure out here in the States eventually, just in the short term, well, short to medium term, I still think we can expect, the offshoring kind of concept to continue with a lot of projects, at least for those who I've spoken with. But again,
Yeah.
specifics, I'm curious to hear kind of what you guys
Yeah.
are seeing on your side.
Well, that makes a lot of sense, and I think we've done both the offshore and the Duna structures, and the concerns with the Duna structure, right, is the tax, right? That's one of the big hurdles to making that process as smooth as what's often advertised as the offshore structure. And so, right, so I know now, like we talk about medium term, there is a tax bill or tax fixes that are being proposed, and I think those kinds of questions are obviously what's circling around, but that's not where we are today.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, you solve for a lot of the regulatory pieces with a change of administration and a more friendly environment in the U.S. for entrepreneurship, especially in this industry. But you still can't get past Treasury, and so that's like so that makes it difficult. So you can, it's just not as efficient, right? And so
Yeah.
like a lot of people want to be here. I think want to be here for good reasons, and they just have to understand the different risk appetite and cost of doing it in either
Yeah.
direction.
The flip side of the coin is, and it's great points, Moish, is that this is still a global industry. And if you are, if you're raising money or you're issuing a token or whatever it may be, and you're focused solely on United States people, that's one thing. They're already paying taxes here. But if you have one of these pass-through taxed entities, an LLC, an LP, or the functional equivalent,
Yeah.
and you're based here and you have people from overseas coming in, they don't want to pay it. They don't want to file a 1040 and deal with that. So
That's right.
I'm still getting tons. In fact, I have one I'm working on right now where we have this master feeder structure where the people are in the US, but they have an offshore fund for the overseas people to help shield them from that. That is still very much a top of mind concern for people, as it should be. I don't want to deal with,
Yeah.
I don't want to deal with the IRS, and I live here.
I know.
Yeah.
It's so true. It's so true. Yeah.